be quiet and just think. But I'm going to leave us all time to do that in the intermission, hopefully. Our second speaker of the night is Peter Kokolet. Coming to BC from Bronxville, New York, Peter now studies business analytics and philosophy. In tonight's talk, Peter will explore the use of psychedelic compounds and their role in forging new connections in the brain, and hopes to destigmatize underlying controversy around mushrooms in his talk titled, Reconsidering Consciousness, How to Use Old Tools to Reinvent Modern Consciousness. Please welcome Peter.
Change your mind to make better people's lives. Think about this for a second. Now, based on this question, based on what happened, I actually didn't know that they were going to say that I was talking about psychedelics in this talk. So, I'm talking about psychedelics today. So that was supposed to be a surprise, but there you go. Now, I'm going to be making the claim that psychedelics are a powerful therapeutic tool that can help society in many different ways. Some of these include, but are not limited to, mental health, addiction, and other societal problems. I was telling my roommate James about this talk, and he said to me, Peter, you know if you go up there and talk about psychedelics, everyone's going to be asking themselves, does this guy do drugs? And it's fair, but I think it's the wrong question, and here's why. If I came up here and said, I have a novel cancer drug that can help to fight cancer, would your question for me be, have you yourself had cancer? Have you tried this drug? Or would your question be, does it work? So today, I challenge you to view this perspective from the library. Okay. So, getting into some of the therapeutic benefits of psychedelics. Now, there are a lot, I can't mention all of them. But one study I had here was when they gave people who were terminally ill with cancer one dose of psilocybin. Now, this is what some people know as magic mushrooms. And in this one dose, monitored by a therapist, they found that there was an 80% substantial and enduring decrease in depression and anxiety in the same. Now, this is very powerful. If we go to the next slide, we can also see that psilocybin, based on different research, has been shown to be more effective than commonly prescribed SSRIs. They've even been proven to have less adverse effects. Our National Institute of Health says that psychedelics are generally considered physiologically safe and do not lead to dependence or addiction. And as a matter of fact, they actually can help with addiction. So, in this study, similar to the terminal cancer patient study, they gave people who were trying to quit smoking one large dose of psilocybin in the attempt to help them quit. It was found that 1 year later, 60% of the participants had fully quit smoking. This is compared to the traditional 24% that we see in typical smoking cessation therapies. Beyond just addiction and mental health, and those are just two studies, you can on your own time go find many more, there are pro-social benefits to psychedelics. In this one survey over here, among 2,000 participants, it was found that men who had used LSD or psilocybin in their life were 42% less likely to commit domestic violence against their partner. And it was shown that, and this one had 480,000 people surveyed, U.S. adults that had taken a psychedelic in their life were 22% less likely to commit a violent crime. So when I talk about psychedelics, it's an umbrella term for a lot of different compounds. And it's important to understand that they have a lot of universal effects and that they're physiologically safe. You can't overdose, your body can't die just from taking it. And so some of the important ones to understand are LSD, which was synthesized in 1943 by a Swiss chemist. And funny story that I highly recommend checking out is the reason he found out it was a psychedelic is he accidentally dosed himself with it. So, yes, crazy story. And then these 3 psychedelics I included are psilocybin, mescaline, and DMT. And these were actually all on the 2024 Massachusetts ballot, for those of you familiar. And they were proposed to be legal for therapies and to be legalized in small possession for people over 21, but it was rejected. So, what is the neuroscience of these psychedelic compounds? So contrary to popular belief, psychedelics actually slow down certain activities in our brain. A lot of people might think that it kind of makes it go crazy or fires the brain up, but what it does is it reduces the activity of our default mode network. Now, what your default mode network is, it's a little difficult to explain. I could have my neuroscience friend Carl maybe give a better attempt, but it's essentially the idle resting state of our brain. And what psychedelics do is they slow it down. And on the other hand, they also form new connections with different activities or, areas of our brain that normally don't talk as much. So as you can see on the left, this is the sober mind and the connections that it makes. And on the right, this is the mind on psilocybin. So there are a lot of new connections formed. So to put this into a metaphor, and I wish I could claim I came up with this amazing metaphor, but I did not. That's Michael Pollan's author. You can think of our mind like a ski slope, right? This is our normal mind with the tracks. We have thought patterns that repeat over and over and over again. Just like on this mountain, people are skiing down the same exact place. Now, this is particularly the case with depressive and anxiety thoughts. We get stuck in them. What the psychedelic experience does is it brings a new snowfall, as we can see over here. And now, the mountain itself doesn't change, but ChatGPT isn't smart enough yet to fill it in all the way without changing it. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, so that's how we get some of the typical characteristics of the psychedelic experience. You can check out William Richard's book, Sacred Knowledge, Psychedelics and Religious Experiences, to learn more about this. But these are some of the traditional things people feel. Awe, wonder, interconnectedness, appreciation for nature, glory, and creativity. Now, one other thing that he mentions in this book is that people who use psychedelics have the feeling for the first time that they're seeing the way the world truly is. Now, for some, this can be very intimidating, very scary, but it can also give some of the positive impacts that we see. For example, one atheist described her experience on psilocybin as being bathed in God's love. Another man who had a history of narcotic abuse and repeated imprisonment reported from his LSD therapy session that God himself forgave him for the things he did wrong in his life. Now, I find that particularly beautiful, and he was able to quit drugs and stay out of prison. So, I asked some BC students what they thought of the word psychedelic, and these were two of the things that I heard. And it's understandable. We, as a society, don't want to change things super a lot. And ego death and bad trip are two things that I heard. But let's look at the numbers. If we can go to this next slide. I looked at 2 studies, and I would like to qualify that these are people in therapy with licensed clinicians because it's much easier to track these things. But among 25,000 doses of LSD and mescaline given to psychiatric patients in the 1950s and 60s, there were only 2 credible reports of suicide, which among a large sample of psychiatric patients is very low. And then when we look to clinical research since the 1990s, there have actually been 0 reported harmful cases of a psilocybin or any other psychedelic clinical session. So we have to ask ourselves, why is it that we're at this point where even the word psychedelic has so much context and stigma behind it? To understand this, we need to go back to the 60s. And in the 60s, there was the famous counterculture led by people such as Timothy Leary, who were very cavalier at using LSD, other psychedelics, as a tool for their anti-war and civil rights movements. Now, they certainly took it too far in many contexts. Timothy Leary himself was a researcher at Harvard, who did sketchy things like joining his patients in a test, which I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to do. And then we also had on the other side the establishment, and when I say that, I mean the government, conservative America, the military-industrial complex. And they had a problem. Because shockingly, when people take a substance that makes them feel interconnected, bathed in God's love, they didn't want to go fight in Vietnam. And I'll let you decide who was on the right side of history. But what happened was, in 1970, the Nixon administration passed the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act. And what it did was, it made psychedelics a Schedule I substance. Now, what this means is they're not only illegal, but it also bans clinical research, and it makes it much more difficult to obtain licenses to do so. So as a result, we now have much less research done. So, because of how much the establishment was threatened by these substances, these psychedelics, there were lies, there was hysteria, there was a lot of misinformation spread about what they did. And if you don't believe me, that's okay. Nixon's assistant for domestic affairs himself admitted that they lied about drugs. Essentially, their two main political enemies, the anti-war left and black communities, used, in some level, drugs, so they saw it as an opportunity to criminalize it and disrupt it. He said this, not me. To me, it's very disappointing that this is what predicates such important legislation in our country and not actual research into what these compounds do. But that was 50 years ago, right? So it must have changed since then. No. Psychedelics to this day are still Schedule I substances. Our DEA defines Schedule I substances as drugs that are addictive and have no medical or therapeutic uses. But wait, what about all those studies that I just talked about? What about the fact that psychedelics actually help with addiction? Was I lying to you? There you go. Let's ask the National Institute of Health, our government's leading medical research agency. They themselves tell us that a lot of the perceived harms of psychedelics have been refuted by research. They say that they are not addictive, they are not neurotoxic. So it really leaves us with the question, how do we have one agency regulating psychedelics as if it's some crazy drug that cannot be used anywhere, even clinical settings, and then we have our leading medical research agency telling us, no, they have benefits. It makes no sense. So, our steps forward. The first logical step forward is to lower the drug schedule. I find it harder to imagine a counter-argument to this. I would love to hear it if someone does. But in doing so, this will open up the opportunity for a lot more clinical research so that we can see better the harms and the potential benefits of psychedelic therapy and other uses. The second, I think psychedelic therapy should be legalized today. I have not found many cases of any harm coming from psychedelic therapy, if any, other than the 2 suicides among psychiatric patients. And I don't think anyone is here to deny that we are in a mental health crisis as a society. And every day that these compounds, these tools remain illegal for therapists to help people with, there is someone out there who is not getting the help that they need. The third, and this is maybe where I lose some people, eventually they should be legalized for people, maybe in the form of licenses for those who demonstrate they can use them in a safe manner. And now, if you think that's crazy, I encourage you to look at these statistics from the UK government. These are the amount of deaths from these different substances. So here is an example of psilocybin. The deaths per 100,000 consumers is in the 0 to 1 range. And then we look at alcohol and tobacco. Yeah. So you may be sitting there wondering, what does this have to do with unknown beauty? And I have a story that I think illustrates this well. I was walking through campus in the mods the other day after the football game. And as anyone here knows that's been to a football game, it's a little sad. There's trash all over the place after the football game. And so I was walking through the mods, and I see at my feet a can on the ground, a beer can. And I just walk past it, and I kind of think to myself, I could have definitely picked that up, right? There's a trash can right there. Like, I literally stepped over it. And normally you kind of just move on and just keep walking. But then in my head, I had this argument with my roommate recently, who, I was saying you should be the person to pick up the can. He was saying, well, not everyone does it. It's not worth the time. But then I was like, no, I'm going to turn around and pick up the can. So I take like 50 steps past the can, and I decide to go back. I don't really know why I did, but I did. I go back to the can, and I pick it up. And it's not an empty beer can, but a full, unopened beer can. I had a beer. It's pretty beautiful. So we, as a society, have not walked 50 steps past something that's been discarded. We've walked 50 years. If we consider this, and we have the courage to turn around and go look, we might just find something in that can. So, I ask you, are you willing to change your mind if it could better people's lives?